Hello, everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
The letter I was afraid to open. Have you ever held a single piece of paper that felt heavier than your entire life? That morning I did. If I had opened that letter just 5 minutes earlier, I honestly believe my marriage might have ended that same day. If I had thrown it away without reading it, I might still be living the same quiet, unhappy life I had been pretending to enjoy. And if that letter had never arrived, I probably would never be telling you this story today. My name is Emma. I live in the United States with my husband and our 2 children. From the outside, our life looked almost perfect. We smiled in family photos. We celebrated birthdays. We waved at our neighbors. We laughed during backyard barbecues. People often told us we were lucky. The strange thing about happiness is that it can look very real from across the street while quietly falling apart behind the front door. That Monday started like every other Monday. I packed school lunches, reminded my children to wear their jackets, kissed my husband goodbye, and watched everyone leave. The house became so quiet that I could hear the refrigerator humming. Then I noticed an envelope lying on the front porch. There was no return address, only my name, written by hand. The handwriting looked familiar, but I couldn't remember why. I carried the envelope into the kitchen and placed it beside my coffee. I stared at it for almost 10 minutes. My heart was beating much faster than it should have. Sometimes your mind invents stories before your eyes ever discover the truth. Mine certainly did. I wondered if someone had discovered a family secret. I wondered if my husband had been hiding something. I even wondered whether the letter was meant for another Emma. Then I slowly opened it. The first sentence almost made me stop breathing. If you keep living this way, you will lose everything that matters. That was all I could read before my hands started shaking. Lose everything? What did that mean? My marriage? My children? My family? I immediately thought of every small argument my husband and I had ignored during the past year. We weren't fighting every day. We weren't screaming. In many ways, that was the problem. We had become experts at pretending everything was fine. We talked about grocery lists, bills, homework, and weekend plans, but we rarely talked about our hearts anymore. Looking back now, silence was becoming a permanent guest in our home. Living in America taught me many wonderful things. People often encourage honesty, kindness, and direct communication. Yet I realized something uncomfortable. You can live in a country that values open conversation while quietly building invisible walls inside your own family. I smiled when neighbors asked how I was doing. I answered, "I'm great." But deep inside, I felt tired, disconnected, and afraid that I was slowly becoming someone I didn't recognize. Around the same time, I had started practicing English every evening for just a few minutes. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to express my feelings more clearly. I discovered that learning a language isn't only about vocabulary. Sometimes it's about finding the courage to say, "I'm not okay," or "I miss the way we used to talk," or simply, "Thank you for staying." Those short sentences became much more powerful than perfect grammar. Still, none of that explained the mysterious letter sitting in my hands. Who wrote it? How did they know exactly what I had been feeling? Why did the first sentence sound less like a threat and more like someone describing my life from inside my own mind? I wanted to keep reading, but fear has a strange way of freezing people. I folded the paper, placed it back inside the envelope, and hid it in a kitchen drawer. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus on anything. Every ordinary sound suddenly felt different. The ticking clock, the garage door opening, my husband's footsteps. Even my children's laughter made me wonder whether I was about to lose the life I loved without realizing it. That evening, my husband smiled and asked me how my day had been. I looked at him, then looked at the drawer where the letter was hidden. For the first time in years, I didn't know whether I was protecting my family or protecting a secret that was about to change every part of my life forever. Everything looked perfect. The strangest part about almost losing my family was this: absolutely nobody could see it. If you had walked past our house that week, you would have thought we were one of those happy American families people secretly wish they could become. My husband always left for work with a smile. Our children laughed while racing each other to the school bus. Every Saturday we shopped together. Every Sunday we cooked dinner as a family. And every holiday our social media looked exactly the way people expect a beautiful life to look. But here's something I wish someone had told me years ago. A smiling family photo is not evidence of a peaceful home. Sometimes it is only evidence that everyone smiled for 3 seconds. After hiding the mysterious letter inside my kitchen drawer, I couldn't stop thinking about that first sentence. If you keep living this way, you will lose everything that matters. The words followed me everywhere. While driving my daughter to piano lessons, while folding laundry, while making coffee, even while pretending to enjoy movie night with my family. I kept asking myself the same terrifying question. Living what way? What was I doing so wrong that someone felt compelled to send me such a warning? The more I thought about it, the more I noticed things I had ignored for months. My husband and I still talked every day, but our conversations had quietly become business meetings. Did you pay the electric bill? Can you pick up milk? Don't forget the soccer practice. We exchanged information, not emotions. We solved schedules instead of understanding each other. Looking back now, I realize something that many couples living in America experience without even noticing. Busy lives slowly replace meaningful conversations. Not because love disappears, but because routine becomes louder than affection. There is an old saying that relationships fail because people stop communicating. I don't think that's completely true anymore. I think many relationships fail because people only communicate about responsibilities and stop communicating about their hearts. My husband wasn't a bad man. In fact, he was thoughtful, hardworking, and deeply devoted to our children. I wasn't unhappy because he had betrayed me. I was unhappy because somewhere between school calendars, grocery receipts, and endless notifications, we had forgotten how to truly see each other. That realization hurt far more than any argument ever could. Living in the United States taught me something else that surprised me. Many American families intentionally protect time together. Neighborhoods become quiet during dinner. Parents attend school events whenever possible. Couples schedule date nights months in advance. Friends openly ask each other, "How are you really doing?" At first, I thought these habits were simply cultural differences. Later, I realized they were quiet investments in relationships. Ignore those investments long enough, and emotional debt begins collecting interest. Ironically, one small habit started changing me before I even understood why. Every evening after cleaning the kitchen, I spent 15 minutes reading simple English stories out loud. At first, it was only pronunciation practice. Slowly, it became something much deeper. Reading slowly forced me to slow my thoughts. Instead of rushing through another exhausting day, I listened to my own voice. I noticed emotions hidden beneath ordinary words like hope, patience, forgiveness, and gratitude. I didn't realize it then, but those quiet reading sessions were preparing me for a conversation that would soon change everything. Scientists often explain that our brains naturally focus more on possible dangers than everyday blessings. It is called negativity bias. That helped me understand why one mysterious sentence inside a letter could erase months of happy memories in only a few minutes. My mind wasn't searching for evidence that my family was safe. It was desperately searching for proof that disaster was already waiting around the corner. And once fear takes control, Even silence begins sounding suspicious. That evening, my husband came home carrying flowers. Not because it was our anniversary. Not because he had done something wrong. Simply because he said the grocery store reminded him of our first date. I smiled politely and thanked him, but deep inside, another voice whispered, "Is he feeling guilty about something?" I hated that thought the moment it appeared, yet I couldn't stop it. Fear had quietly become the loudest person in the room. Later that night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I walked into the kitchen, opened the drawer, and took out the letter again. This time I noticed something I had completely missed before. At the bottom of the second page was a handwritten sentence, so small that I hadn't even seen it during my panic. As soon as I leaned closer to read those tiny words, I realized the truth behind the letter was even more shocking than the warning itself. And nothing about my life would ever look ordinary again. I began to doubt everything. There's something frightening about fear. It doesn't need proof to grow. It only needs silence. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I carried the mysterious letter into the living room and read it again under the soft light beside the couch. My hands were calmer than before, but my heart certainly wasn't. Then I finally noticed the tiny handwritten sentence near the bottom of the page that I had completely missed earlier. It simply said, "The answer has been in your home every single day." I stared at those words over and over again. In my home? What answer? My eyes slowly traveled around the room. The family photographs on the wall. The blanket my daughter always left on the sofa. My husband's reading glasses resting beside his favorite chair. Everything looked exactly as it always had. Yet suddenly nothing felt ordinary anymore. My imagination became louder than reality. I wondered if someone had been watching us. I wondered if the letter came from someone who knew our family personally. I even wondered if my husband had secretly asked someone to write it because he couldn't tell me the truth himself. Looking back now, I realize how dangerous an unchecked imagination can become. The human brain is designed to fill empty spaces with stories, and unfortunately, those stories are usually worse than reality. Every little detail suddenly seemed suspicious. When my husband smiled while checking his phone, I wondered who he was texting. When he came home 10 minutes later than usual, I imagined conversations that had never happened. When he quietly sat on the back porch after dinner, I convinced myself he was hiding something. The strange part was that he hadn't changed at all. I had. Fear had quietly rewritten every ordinary moment into something mysterious. The next morning, our family followed the same routine we had followed hundreds of times before. The children laughed over breakfast. My husband packed lunches while humming an old country song. He kissed me goodbye before leaving for work and told me, "Don't forget tonight is family movie night." His voice sounded warm, gentle, exactly like always. Yet instead of feeling comforted, I found myself studying every expression on his face, searching for clues that probably didn't exist. It exhausted me. That afternoon, I tried distracting myself by reading another short English story aloud, something I had recently begun doing every day. Speaking slowly helped organize my thoughts. I repeated simple sentences several times. Every story has two sides. Not every fear becomes reality. Truth is patient. Those words sounded like ordinary English practice, but somehow they reached much deeper than pronunciation. I noticed something fascinating. When I slowed down my reading, I also slowed down my thinking. Psychologists often explain that slowing our breathing and speech can reduce emotional reactivity because it gives the brain more time to separate facts from assumptions. I didn't know the scientific term at the time. I only knew that for 15 peaceful minutes, the frightening stories inside my head became quieter. Then, everything changed again. While organizing old papers inside a hallway cabinet, I accidentally knocked over a small wooden box. Letters, birthday cards, children's drawings, and faded photographs scattered across the floor. As I picked them up, I discovered another envelope hidden underneath. My heart immediately started racing. It looked almost identical to the mysterious letter. Same cream-colored paper. Same handwriting. Same careful way my name had been written. My hands froze. Had there been two letters all along? Why had I never seen this one before? I slowly opened it, expecting another warning. Instead, I found something completely unexpected. The first line read, "If you're reading this, you're looking for problems instead of looking for love." I couldn't breathe for a moment. The sentence felt deeply personal, almost as if the writer had been standing beside me during the past few days, watching every fearful thought that had crossed my mind. I quickly turned the page, hoping to find a signature. There was none. No name. No address. Nothing that explained who had written either letter. Just one final sentence at the bottom. Ask your husband about the blue box before making another assumption. I looked down at the wooden box, lying open on the living room floor. It was painted dark blue. My husband had owned it for years. I had seen it countless times but had never asked where it came from. Suddenly, I realized something deeply uncomfortable. During all these years of marriage, there were still pieces of each other's stories we had never shared. Maybe the biggest problem wasn't that we had secrets. Maybe it was that we had stopped asking meaningful questions. That evening, as I heard my husband's car pull into the driveway, I stood beside the kitchen counter, holding the blue box in one hand and the mysterious letters in the other. For several long seconds, I wondered whether the next conversation would destroy my marriage or save it forever. The truth inside the blue box. For a few seconds, I simply stood there, staring at the blue wooden box while my husband's footsteps came closer through the front door. My heart was beating so loudly that I barely heard him call my name. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways. In every version, someone cried, someone confessed, and someone's heart was broken. Isn't it amazing how fear writes entire movies inside our minds before reality even gets a chance to speak? My husband walked into the kitchen, smiled as usual, and immediately noticed the box in my hands. His smile disappeared, not because he looked guilty, but because he looked surprised. "Where did you find that?" he asked quietly. It wasn't the question I expected. I thought he would ask why I was holding it. Instead, he sounded as though he hadn't seen the box in years. Without saying a word, I placed the two mysterious letters beside it. His eyes moved from the envelopes to my face. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he gently pulled out a chair and said something I will never forget. "Before you ask me anything, let me tell you the whole story." Those words instantly changed the atmosphere. He wasn't defending himself. He wasn't avoiding the conversation. He simply wanted me to hear everything before making another conclusion. Looking back now, I realize how rare that is. In many relationships, people fight to be right. Very few pause long enough to understand. He slowly opened the blue box. Inside were old birthday cards from our children, faded photographs from our first apartment, ticket stubs from concerts we had attended years ago, handwritten notes we had exchanged while dating, and one carefully folded piece of paper that looked much older than everything else. He held it gently, almost as if it could break. "This," he whispered, "is the letter that changed my life before we even met." I felt every assumption I had made during the past 3 days begin to collapse. He unfolded the paper and handed it to me. The handwriting was identical to the mysterious letters I had received. My eyes searched for a signature. There was one this time. It belonged to his grandmother. Years before I knew him, She had written him a letter after noticing he was becoming consumed by work, stress, and the endless pursuit of success. She had written one sentence that he carried with him for the rest of his life. The people you love rarely disappear all at once. They disappear one unnoticed conversation at a time. I couldn't speak. My husband explained that after his grandmother passed away, he kept her letter inside the blue box as a reminder to protect his future family. He admitted that recently he had been feeling the same distance growing between us. He noticed we were becoming roommates instead of partners, parents instead of best friends. But instead of blaming me, he blamed himself for allowing routine to replace connection. Then I asked the question that had been haunting me from the beginning. Who sent me these letters? He smiled sadly and shook his head. I did. I stared at him in complete disbelief. He continued speaking before I could interrupt. I didn't know how to tell you how scared I was. Every time I tried, it sounded like criticism. I remembered my grandmother's letter. So I rewrote parts of it and mailed them anonymously because I hoped curiosity would succeed where my words had failed. For a moment, I didn't know whether to feel angry, relieved, or grateful. Part of me wanted to shout that he should have simply talked to me. Another part understood exactly why he hadn't. Sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones we postpone because we love someone too much to risk hurting them. Ironically, avoiding those conversations often creates even more pain. Research in relationship psychology consistently shows that emotional distance rarely begins with major betrayals. More often, it grows from small moments of disconnection repeated over months or years. Missed conversations, unspoken fears, assumptions left unchallenged. Sitting across from my husband, I realized we had become living proof of that truth. Then he reached across the table and asked me one simple question. When was the last time we talked without checking the clock? I searched my memory and couldn't answer. That silence hurt more than the mysterious letters ever had. Tears slowly filled my eyes, not because my marriage was ending, but because I suddenly understood how close we had come to losing something precious without either of us noticing. Later that evening, after our children had gone to bed, we made an unusual decision. We turned off our phones, left the television dark, made 2 cups of tea, and spent hours talking about everything we had never said aloud. We spoke about fear, exhaustion, dreams, gratitude, and even the small English stories I had been reading every evening. My husband smiled and admitted he often stood outside the living room listening to me practice because my calm voice reminded him of the woman he had fallen in love with years earlier. At that moment, the mysterious letter no longer felt like a warning. It felt like an unexpected gift. But neither of us realized that the greatest test of everything we had rediscovered wasn't behind us yet. Less than 48 hours later, one unexpected phone call would force our family to prove whether we had truly changed, or whether we had only enjoyed one beautiful conversation before returning to our old lives. The phone call that tested everything. 2 mornings later, just as I was beginning to believe the mysterious letter had already done its job, my phone rang. It was only 7:18 a.m., far earlier than anyone in our family usually called. I glanced at the screen and saw the local elementary school. My stomach tightened immediately. Every parent knows that feeling. When the school calls unexpectedly, your mind races through 100 terrible possibilities before you even answer. I picked up the phone with shaking hands. The school nurse spoke calmly. My youngest son had fallen during recess preparation before classes officially began. He wasn't seriously injured, but he had hit his head hard enough that they wanted one of us to come immediately. 10 days earlier, I probably would have panicked. I might have cried before hearing the entire explanation. I might have blamed my husband for not answering his phone fast enough. I might have allowed fear to become louder than facts once again.
But something inside me had changed.
The mysterious letter had forced me to recognize how quickly assumptions can become emotional storms. Instead of imagining the worst, I took a slow breath, thanked the nurse, and called my husband. He answered on the second ring. "I'm already leaving work," he said before I even finished explaining. There was no blame.
No frustración.
No argument about whose schedule mattered more. We simply worked together. Driving toward the school, I noticed something unusual about myself. My hands weren't trembling. My breathing stayed steady. It reminded me of the slow English reading practice I had quietly built into my evenings. Reading simple stories aloud had never been about becoming perfect at English. Without realizing it, I had also been training myself to slow down under pressure. Researchers have found that speaking and breathing at a slower rhythm can help regulate emotional responses by activating the body's natural calming systems. I didn't know the scientific explanation when I first started practicing. I only knew that slowing my voice somehow slowed my fears. When we arrived, our son was sitting on a small chair with an ice pack on his forehead, looking more embarrassed than injured. As soon as he saw us together, he smiled and said, "I knew both of you would come." That sentence stayed with me for the rest of the day. Children rarely remember every gift their parents buy. They remember who showed up when they were scared. On the drive home, my husband reached across the center console and gently squeezed my hand. Neither of us said anything for several minutes. Silence felt different now. It no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. Then he laughed softly and admitted something that surprised me. When the school called, my first thought wasn't fear. It was gratitude. I looked at him, confused. Gratitude. He nodded. Because 2 weeks ago we might have spent the entire drive arguing. Today we spent it protecting our son together. I realized he was right. The emergency hadn't changed us. It had revealed that we had already changed. Sometimes life doesn't test your strength. It simply reveals the habits you've been practicing all along. That evening after dinner, I opened my notebook where I usually copied short English sentences for reading practice. Instead of writing vocabulary, I wrote something my husband had said earlier. Protect the relationship before protecting your pride. I read the sentence aloud several times. It was simple English, easy grammar, but the meaning reached much deeper than language learning. Every slow sentence reminded me that communication is built one honest conversation at a time. Over the following week, our home began to feel different in ways that were almost impossible to photograph but impossible to ignore. We ate dinner without phones on the table. We asked each other questions that couldn't be answered with yes or no. We laughed more often over small mistakes instead of criticizing them. Some evenings I continued reading English stories aloud, and instead of practicing alone, my husband quietly listened while preparing tea. Occasionally, he repeated a sentence after me, joking about his pronunciation. Those moments lasted only a few minutes, yet they became some of my favorite memories. I finally understood why so many happy families in America intentionally protect simple daily rituals. Strong relationships are rarely built during vacations or holidays. They are built during ordinary Tuesday evenings when two people decide to truly listen instead of simply waiting for their turn to speak. Then, just as life began feeling peaceful again, I noticed one final folded page still hidden inside the blue wooden box. Somehow, in all the emotions surrounding the mysterious letters, neither of us had opened it. The paper looked older than everything else, and across the front, in my husband's grandmother's familiar handwriting, were 6 words that immediately sent a chill through my body. Do not read this too late. I slowly looked up at my husband. His expression told me he had completely forgotten that page existed. Neither of us had any idea that the final message inside that forgotten letter would become the most important lesson our family would ever receive. The forgotten final letter. I thought the mystery was over. I thought the anonymous letters had already revealed everything they were meant to reveal. I was wrong. Sometimes the most life-changing message is not the first one you read. It is the one that patiently waits until your heart is finally ready to understand it. My husband carefully lifted the last folded page from the blue wooden box. The paper was older, thinner, and slightly yellow around the edges. It had been folded so many times that the creases looked ready to split apart. Across the front, in his grandmother's familiar handwriting, were the words that had stayed in my mind ever since I first saw them. Do not read this too late. Neither of us spoke. Even the children, who had been laughing in the backyard only a few minutes earlier, suddenly felt far away. The house became unbelievably quiet. My husband unfolded the paper slowly, almost respectfully, as though he were opening a conversation with someone who had been gone for many years. Then he began reading aloud. One day, you will wake up believing you still have plenty of time. Time to apologize. Time to listen. Time to forgive. Time to say, I love you. But life rarely announces when time is running out. If you love your family, don't wait for fear to teach you what gratitude could have taught much earlier. My eyes immediately filled with tears. The words were simple. There were no dramatic promises. No complicated advice. Yet every sentence seemed to describe the life we had almost created without realizing it. We had been waiting for a better season to reconnect. A quieter month. Less work. Fewer responsibilities. We believed love would patiently wait while life became more convenient. But relationships don't grow stronger because time passes. They grow stronger because people choose each other again and again. My husband stopped reading for a moment and quietly admitted something that completely surprised me. I almost threw this letter away years ago. I looked at him in disbelief. He explained that after his grandmother passed away, reading the letter had been too painful. Every sentence reminded him of conversations they would never have again. So he placed it inside the blue box and convinced himself he already remembered its message. But memory is not the same as practice. Knowing what matters is very different from living as though it matters every day. That realization stayed with both of us. Modern life in America moves incredibly fast. Calendars become crowded. Phones never stop buzzing. Families often spend hours inside the same house while everyone quietly stares at different screens. Technology connects us to the entire world, yet it sometimes disconnects us from the people sitting only a few feet away. We had fallen into that rhythm without noticing. Not because we loved each other less, but because distractions had quietly become our daily routine. Psychologists often describe relationships as emotional bank accounts. Every kind word, every thoughtful question, every shared meal becomes a small deposit. Every ignored conversation, every unnecessary assumption, every forgotten promise becomes a withdrawal. Most marriages don't collapse after one difficult day. They weaken after thousands of tiny moments when deposits slowly become less frequent than withdrawals. Sitting there with that old letter in my hands, I realized we had been given something many couples never receive. A chance to notice the pattern before it became permanent. That evening, we made a decision that sounded almost too simple to matter. Every night after dinner, our family would spend 30 uninterrupted minutes together.
No phones.
No television.
No rusing.
Sometimes we would play a board game. Sometimes we would simply talk about our day. Sometimes I would read a short English story aloud because our children enjoyed repeating the easy sentences with me. What began as light English practice quietly became our favorite family tradition. My daughter loved guessing the meanings of new words. My son laughed every time I exaggerated different character voices. Even my husband occasionally interrupted just to ask, "Can you read that sentence again? I like the way it sounds." Those ordinary evenings slowly became extraordinary memories. I also noticed something unexpected happening inside myself. I no longer practiced English because I was afraid of making mistakes. I practiced because every new word gave me another way to express appreciation, encouragement, kindness, and love. Language stopped feeling like a test. It became a bridge. Looking back, I finally understood why the mysterious letters had affected me so deeply. They were never trying to frighten me into changing. They were trying to wake me up before comfort quietly became regret. Just when I believed the story had finally reached its peaceful ending, my husband gently turned over the last page. On the back, written in smaller handwriting, was one final sentence that neither of us had expected to see. It wasn't written by his grandmother at all. It had been added years later by someone else. The message contained only 8 words. "Now, write a letter your children will never forget." My husband slowly looked at me, and without saying another word, we both understood exactly what we needed to do next. That single sentence would become the beginning of the most emotional chapter our family had ever lived. The letter we wrote together. The hardest letter I have ever written wasn't the mysterious one that arrived in my mailbox. It was the one my husband and I decided to write for our children. At first, it sounded like a beautiful idea, a family project,
A meaningful tradition.
something they could read many years from now. But the moment I placed my pen on the paper, I realized something terrifying. What if the words we wanted our children to remember were not the words we had been living? I looked across the kitchen table at my husband. He hadn't written a single sentence either. We both smiled awkwardly. It was much easier to pay bills, plan vacations, or organize schedules than to explain what kind of family we truly wanted to become. Finally, my husband broke the silence. "Maybe we shouldn't write advice," he said quietly. "Maybe we should write the truth." That sentence changed everything. Instead of pretending we had always been perfect parents, we began writing about our mistakes. We admitted that there were evenings when work followed us home. We admitted that we sometimes answered our phones faster than we answered each other. We admitted that fear, stress, and busy schedules had occasionally stolen moments we could never get back. Strangely, writing those honest words didn't make us feel weaker. It made us feel free. There is something powerful about replacing perfection with honesty. Children don't need parents who never struggle. They need parents who show them how to grow through struggle. As our letter slowly filled with memories, I noticed something that almost made me laugh. Every important lesson came from an ordinary day, not an extraordinary one. We wrote about rainy afternoons when we baked cookies together. We wrote about family walks through our neighborhood after dinner. We wrote about sitting around the living room reading simple stories aloud while everyone took turns making different voices for the characters. Those tiny moments had quietly become the strongest parts of our family history. Living in the United States had taught us many practical things about work, education, and opportunity, but one lesson stood above the rest. Many strong families intentionally create traditions that seem almost too simple to matter. Weekly dinners, game nights, birthday letters, holiday walks, community volunteering. These traditions aren't valuable because they are exciting. They're valuable because they remind people they belong somewhere. Researchers studying family resilience have found that predictable family rituals help children develop emotional security and stronger communication skills. Looking around our own kitchen, I realized we were beginning to experience exactly that. Our home hadn't become perfect. It had become intentional. Later that evening, our daughter wandered into the room and noticed the unfinished letter. "What are you writing?" she asked. My husband smiled and replied, "Something we hope you'll read when you're older." She thought for a moment before saying something neither of us expected. "Can I write something too?" We handed her a blank sheet of paper. She carefully printed one short sentence in large letters. "Thank you for eating dinner with us." I stared at those 7 words for a long time. Out of everything she could have written, she didn't thank us for birthdays, presents, vacations, or expensive experiences. She thanked us for simply sitting at the same table. Children often notice what adults overlook. That moment reminded me that love is measured less by grand gestures and more by repeated presence. My son, not wanting to be left out, grabbed a crayon and proudly wrote, "I like when Mommy reads stories slowly." Everyone laughed because he emphasized the word slowly as if it were the most important part. Maybe it was. Those evening reading sessions had quietly become part of our family's rhythm. Sometimes the stories were simple English passages with easy vocabulary. Sometimes they were children's classics. Occasionally we paused to explain a new word or repeat a sentence together. None of us were trying to become perfect speakers. We were simply enjoying time together. Without realizing it, language had become a tool for connection instead of performance. I began understanding something that many people miss when learning English. Fluency is wonderful, but meaningful communication matters even more. A kind sentence spoken slowly can change someone's day. A sincere apology spoken imperfectly can heal years of misunderstanding. A gentle, "I love you," never needs complicated grammar. As the weeks passed, the mysterious letters no longer felt like frightening warnings. They became landmarks, marking the moment our family chose a different direction. Friends started commenting that we looked happier. Neighbors noticed we spent more evenings walking together. Even our children laughed more often at home. Nothing dramatic had happened. We hadn't moved, changed jobs, or won the lottery. We had simply begun protecting the small moments that quietly build a meaningful life. Then, just as we prepared to seal our family letter inside the blue wooden box for future generations, my husband unfolded one last piece of paper that had accidentally slipped beneath the box's lining. It wasn't old at all. In fact, it looked as though someone had placed it there only recently. Across the top was my name, written in handwriting I immediately recognized. It wasn't my husband's. It wasn't his grandmother's. And the first sentence made every hair on my arm stand up. "Emma, there is one final truth you still don't know." The truth was my own letter. My hands were shaking before I even unfolded the page. I knew that handwriting. I had seen it thousands of times while writing grocery lists, birthday cards, little notes for my children's lunch boxes, and reminders stuck to our refrigerator.
It was my handwriting.
I looked at my husband, expecting him to explain what kind of joke this was, but his face showed the same confusion I felt. He slowly whispered, "Emma, I didn't write that." For a long moment, neither of us moved. I carefully unfolded the paper, and the first sentence instantly pulled the air from my lungs. "If you're reading this, it means you finally stopped running from yourself." My heart pounded so loudly, I could barely hear my own breathing. How could I have written something I didn't remember writing? I kept reading. "You promised that if life ever became too busy, too comfortable, or too quiet, you would remind yourself what truly matters." Suddenly, memories began returning in small pieces, like photographs slowly developing in an old camera. About 3 years earlier, after attending a community wellness workshop in our town, everyone had been given an unusual assignment. The speaker had challenged us to write a letter to our future selves. Not a letter about career goals or money, but about the person we hoped we would never become. I remembered sitting alone one evening after the children were asleep, writing page after page with complete honesty. I had written about my fear of becoming emotionally distant. I had written about how easy it would be to confuse being busy with being happy. I had written one promise above all others: never let routine become more important than the people you love. Then I had completely forgotten about it. At the end of the workshop, each participant sealed the letter inside an envelope to be opened years later. Somehow, during one of our house reorganizations, I must have placed it inside the blue box without remembering. I smiled through tears. The greatest mystery had not been created by a stranger. It had been created by the younger version of myself, the woman who already understood the danger long before I was willing to admit it. I continued reading. If your children laugh less around the dinner table, slow down. If your husband starts looking tired instead of peaceful, ask him how he really feels. If you keep saying, "We'll talk tomorrow," remember that tomorrow quietly becomes next month, and next month quietly becomes next year. Every sentence felt painfully accurate. It was almost impossible to believe I had written those words years earlier. My husband gently reached for my hand and smiled. Your younger self knew exactly what your future self would need. We both laughed softly. There was something strangely comforting about realizing that hope had been waiting for us all along. Psychologists often describe a practice called expressive writing, where people write honestly about their emotions and experiences. Studies suggest that this simple habit can improve emotional clarity, reduce stress, and even strengthen relationships because it helps people recognize patterns they might otherwise ignore. Without realizing it, I had given myself that opportunity years ago. I simply wasn't ready to receive it until now. From that evening forward, one tradition quietly transformed our family. On the first Sunday of every month, each of us wrote a short letter. Sometimes it was only a few sentences. Sometimes it filled several pages. We wrote about gratitude, fears, dreams, funny memories, and little victories. No one was required to share unless they wanted to. Surprisingly, the children loved it. Our daughter once wrote that her happiest memory of the month was hearing rain on the roof while we read stories together. Our son proudly wrote that he wanted to become a daddy who always listens. My husband wrote that he hoped he would never again become too busy to notice the people sitting across the dinner table. As for me, I continued reading simple English stories every evening. At first, it had been a way to improve my confidence with the language. Now it had become something much more meaningful. Reading slowly reminded me to live slowly. Every carefully spoken sentence became a small pause in a world that constantly encouraged rushing. I noticed that when I slowed my voice, I listened more carefully. When I listened more carefully, I loved more intentionally. Perhaps that was the greatest lesson hidden inside every mysterious letter. The words themselves were never magical. The willingness to stop and truly hear them was. Just when I believed every secret had finally been uncovered, my husband quietly stood up, walked to the bookshelf, and returned holding an old family photo album I hadn't opened in years. He pointed to a picture taken shortly after our daughter was born. Tucked behind the photograph was another sealed envelope, untouched by time. Across the front were only 6 handwritten words that made both of us completely speechless. Open this only when you forgive yourself. The letter I was finally ready to read. For the longest minute of my life, I couldn't bring myself to touch the final envelope. For simple words echoed inside my mind. Open this only when you forgive yourself. Not when you forgive someone else. Not when life becomes easier. Not when your marriage feels perfect. Only when you forgive yourself. I suddenly realized that all the mysterious letters, all the sleepless nights, and every difficult conversation had been leading to this single moment. My husband didn't rush me. He simply sat beside me on the living room floor, gently holding my hand while the children slept upstairs. The house was completely still. Outside, a light summer rain tapped softly against the windows, the kind of peaceful sound that makes you slow down whether you want to or not. I finally broke the seal. Inside was only one page. No long speech.
No dramatic confession.
Just a few carefully written paragraphs in my own handwriting. Dear Emma, if you have reached this day, I hope you stopped blaming yourself for every difficult season. I hope you finally understand that loving your family does not require perfection. Your children will not remember whether every meal was perfect. Your husband will not remember whether every plan succeeded. They will remember whether they felt safe, heard, and loved when life became difficult. Tears rolled down my face before I reached the end of the first paragraph. I hadn't realized how much invisible guilt I had been carrying. I blamed myself whenever the children argued. I blamed myself whenever my husband looked tired after work. I blamed myself whenever I forgot an appointment or lost my patience. Without noticing it, I had quietly accepted an impossible job description. Be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, and the perfect person every single day. Of course, I kept failing. No one could succeed at something that doesn't exist. The letter continued. Please stop measuring your life against edited photographs and perfect families you see from a distance. Every home has silent struggles. The strongest families are not the ones without problems. They are the ones who keep choosing each other after the problems arrive. I slowly lowered the page. Those words felt especially meaningful in today's world. It is easy to scroll through endless smiling pictures and believe everyone else has discovered the secret to happiness. Yet psychologists have repeatedly found that comparing ourselves to carefully selected moments from other people's lives often increases anxiety, dissatisfaction, and feelings of failure. I had unknowingly fallen into that trap. I compared my ordinary life to everyone else's highlight reel. No wonder gratitude had become so difficult to recognize. My husband quietly smiled and asked, "Do you believe those words now?" I looked at him and answered honestly, "I think I'm finally starting to." He nodded.
Good.
Because I've been hoping you would forgive yourself long before you forgave anyone else. That sentence stayed with me for days. Forgiveness isn't always about another person. Sometimes the person waiting longest for compassion is the one looking back at you in the mirror every morning. During the following weeks, I noticed remarkable changes that couldn't be measured by money or achievements. Breakfast conversations became longer. Evening walks became slower. We laughed more often about our mistakes instead of treating them like failures. Even disagreements felt different because we had learned to solve problems together instead of trying to win arguments. One evening, our daughter asked a question that completely surprised us. Why does our house feel happier now? Children often ask questions adults spend years avoiding. My husband smiled at her and replied, "Because we're listening more than we're worrying." She nodded as though that answer made perfect sense. Maybe it did. Looking back, I also realized that my quiet English reading practice had become part of this transformation. Every evening, I still spent a few minutes reading simple stories aloud. Not because I feared making mistakes anymore, but because those peaceful moments reminded me to slow my breathing, organize my thoughts, and appreciate ordinary conversations. I learned that communication is not about using impressive vocabulary. It is about helping another person feel understood. Sometimes the most powerful English sentence in the world contains only 3 words. I understand you. The blue wooden box eventually returned to its place on the bookshelf, but it no longer represented fear or mystery. It represented second chances. Inside were the anonymous letters, my husband's grandmother's wisdom, our children's handwritten notes, and my own forgotten promises to myself. It had quietly become the story of our family, not because life had been easy, but because we had finally chosen honesty over assumptions, gratitude over routine, and connection over distraction. Then, on an ordinary Sunday afternoon, while putting the blue box back onto the highest shelf, a tiny folded card slipped through a narrow crack in the bottom and landed at my feet. It wasn't addressed to me. It wasn't addressed to my husband. On the front, written in elegant handwriting, were only 7 unforgettable words. The final letter was never meant for you. The letter was always for you. I turned the small folded card over with trembling hands, still trying to understand the sentence written across the front. The final letter was never meant for you. I looked at my husband, expecting another surprise, but this time he looked just as confused as I was. We carefully opened the card together. Inside, there was only one paragraph. It wasn't signed. It didn't explain who wrote it. It simply said, "If this letter has reached your hands, it means your family has already learned the lesson. Don't keep it. Pass it forward." Somewhere, another family is smiling in photographs while quietly falling apart behind closed doors. Neither of us spoke. We simply sat there, letting those words settle into the silence. Then my husband smiled and whispered, "Maybe the story was never supposed to end with us." That simple sentence completely changed the way I understood everything that had happened. For weeks, I had believed the mysterious letters were trying to rescue my marriage. But perhaps they were preparing us to help someone else before it became too late. The following weekend, we made a decision that felt both strange and meaningful. Instead of locking every letter back inside the blue wooden box forever, we created copies. Not because we wanted to share private family memories, but because the messages inside belonged to every home that had forgotten how to slow down and truly listen. We removed names, personal details, and anything that belonged only to us. What remained were timeless reminders about gratitude, communication, forgiveness, and choosing family before routine. A few days later, our local community center hosted a family evening. Parents, children, grandparents, and neighbors gathered for games, music, and conversation. Near the entrance stood a simple table where visitors could leave anonymous notes of encouragement for others. I quietly placed one envelope there. Across the front I wrote only 6 words, "Please open this when life feels heavy." I never waited to see who picked it up. Some stories don't need an ending. They need another beginning. Weeks passed, and life returned to something beautifully ordinary. My husband still left early for work. The children still argued about whose turn it was to wash the dishes. Laundry still piled up. Bills still arrived. Nothing about our daily responsibilities magically disappeared. The miracle wasn't that life became easier. The miracle was that we had learned to experience ordinary days differently. We protected family dinners. We laughed more often. We apologized more quickly. We listened before assuming. We thanked each other for small things that once went unnoticed. Living in America taught me that success is often measured by bigger houses, better careers, and busier schedules. But our family discovered another measurement that mattered much more. We began asking ourselves one simple question every evening. Did someone in this house feel deeply loved today? If the answer was yes, the day had already been successful. Research on long-term relationships consistently shows that emotional connection grows through repeated acts of kindness rather than occasional grand gestures. Looking back, I realized every mysterious letter had quietly encouraged exactly that. Not dramatic changes. Small, consistent choices. A sincere conversation. an apology offered without pride, a hug that lasted a few seconds longer, a family meal without phones, a bedtime story read slowly enough for everyone to breathe. My own English reading practice also found a new purpose. At first, I had started reading aloud simply to become more confident with the language. Today, those quiet reading sessions have become moments of peace shared with my family. Sometimes my children repeat simple sentences after me. Sometimes my husband laughs while trying new expressions. We are not chasing perfect English. We are building perfect moments from imperfect conversations. That may be the greatest lesson language has ever taught me. You do not need complicated words to change someone's life. Sometimes a gentle "I'm listening." Sometimes "I'm sorry." Sometimes "thank you." Sometimes "I love you." The vocabulary is simple. The impact can last forever. Every now and then, I open the blue wooden box again. Inside are the mysterious letters, my husband's grandmother's wisdom, our children's handwritten notes, and the promise I once wrote to my future self. I no longer see fear when I look at those pages. I see evidence that people can change before it's too late. I see proof that love grows stronger when it is practiced instead of assumed. I see a family that almost drifted apart, not because of betrayal, but because of busyness. And I see the quiet courage of one letter that refused to let us continue living on autopilot. So let me ask you one final question before this story ends. If a mysterious letter arrived at your door tomorrow morning with your name written across the front, what would you hope it says? Maybe you don't need to wait for an anonymous envelope. Maybe tonight is the right time to write your own letter, make one phone call, begin one honest conversation, or tell someone you love exactly how much they matter. Sometimes an entire life changes because of one page. Sometimes an entire family changes because of one sentence. And sometimes the letter that changes everything is the one you decide to write today. That's all for today. I'll be creating many more stories like this in the future. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one.